Hello, my name is Chris Rainey. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Synexis Biodefense, and I'm going to run through our slide deck today. But first, I kind of want to give you a little background. Myself, Eric Slody, our CEO, Charles Tribier, our COO, and Russ Stevens and David Dillard. We all came from the medical device space prior to joining Synexis Biodefense. So when we set this up, we quickly realized in this particular space, there wasn't a lot of real hard data. So what we wanted to do is establish ourselves as a data-driven company. So we did that the first year. We've been here a little over 4 years. Our first year, all we did was collect data points. So from swabs to air samples to pre and post, and a lot of different verticals to establish our consistent data. So I just want to bring that up front. We run this very similarly to a medical device company in the fact that we are data driven, and we don't make any claims without documented proof that we can do something, or not a lot of speculation like we see in some of the other companies. So Synexis Biodefense, give you a quick overview. Our founder is Jim Lee. So Jim was a cadet at West Point. Jim stayed on at West Point as part of the biochemistry department, and he also got his master's at University of Virginia. He went back and taught at West Point as far as the chemical, biological, radiologic, and nuclear defense protocols. He was driving towards bio attack sensor technologies and was working on that very, very closely. Got out into the private sector, was directly involved with the anthrax letters with Microsoft and some of the other terroristic threats with the African embassy bombing and the World Trade Center, et cetera. He played an integral role with IAG. He quickly realized that the biologic attack sensors, the biggest problem with that is by the time you realize there's attack, it's usually too late. So he pivoted and wanted to create an immune system for a building. And that's where we are today. Our technology is actively effective against viruses, bacteria, and fungi in occupied spaces on a continuous basis. So we are continuously producing dry hydrogen peroxide, or the gas phase hydrogen peroxide, on a continuous basis at a very low dose with no change in employee or behavior. So very, very effective. We are actually the sole provider of DHP, or dry hydrogen peroxide. We have over 150 patents to that effect. So there's a lot of claims that other companies might make hydrogen peroxide. That would be the case, that it might be active in their plasma field, but it's not. They did not stabilize it to get out into the environment. So this is our HVAC blade unit. So what you'll see here is we have, first we'll go to the UVA bulb. So this is a UVA bulb. It's not a pesticidal or a germicidal bulb. It's UL approved. There's no danger of looking at it, any danger with the activity by looking at this UVA bulb. It is strictly there to create energy, and it creates 362 nanometers of energy. What that does, in conjunction with our catalyst, or our sail, which is right here, we facilitate molecular change. So we're basically splitting the oxygen molecule, binding it with the H2O molecule, and on this side we get an ideal version of hydrogen peroxide in gas form. So there's no water dilution. It's just pure gas hydrogen peroxide, and that's why it's so effective at such a low dose. It's because it's not mixed with water. It goes everywhere the air goes. So it's going to go places that you typically clean, and typically in places that you can't get to, whether it's out of reach or it's inconvenient. It's going to go to basically every crack and cranny in your space. So it's going to go places cleaned and non-cleaned, surfaces and air on a continuous basis. This is a active medical environment. So we treat airborne microbes, airborne contaminants, surface contaminants. There's no shadow areas like you get with UV light or some of the other products, because we're literally floating around as an ideal gas. So it's going to go everywhere the air goes. It's going to go to the back of your desk drawer over time. We also have work on cross contamination, where you might take something from one space to another. A lot of exposure to this recently with the COVID, because people can be contaminating places. They don't even know they're infected with the virus, but they can actually spread with a viral shed the virus in spaces without even being actively aware. Our technology does not rely on air exchanges, so we're the only system that puts something actively out into the environment that you're not relying on an air exchange to cycle through to show efficacy. We also are very, very beneficial on the mitigation of pests or insects. So to be able to process hydrogen peroxide in the gas form, you have to have lungs. It's part of our immune system as part of the catalase. Obviously, insects do not have lungs, so they have tracheal tubes. They breathe in with the tracheal tubes. They need to be active to process that oxygen. So what happens with the dry hydrogen peroxide, we're an irritant to that, so that they become dormant and die, or they'll vacate the premises. We've got some in-depth studies that we looked at that from other markets that I'll get into, and we also mitigate odors or VOCs. So as far as our safety profile, we're putting out between 5 and 25 parts per billion with a B. And our normal lung secretions as part of our immune system, we have about 1.8 parts per million. And then the aqueous vaporized droplets, it can get up to 750 parts per million. That's a very, very high dose, but it's mixed with water. And by mixing it with water, you have to have a higher concentration because you're competing with the water with the pathogens as far as taking on that molecule. To put that in perspective, a single unit of Synexis would have to run continuously for 2.5 years in order to equal one droplet of the highly concentrated 750 parts per million dose. And then people ask, well, how are you effective at that low a dose? It's continuous, and it's pure hydrogen peroxide with no water. So, and it's continuously producing. It doesn't stop, and it isn't in all areas of the space. So as far as the OSHA guidelines, the OSHA standard is 1 part per million in a 40-hour weighted work week. So in our doses of 5 to 20 parts per billion, there's not enough time in the week for you to get near that exposure limit of 1 part per million. So we're very, very safe. We did a study actually at LSU Medical Center. So we took 2 sets of swine, treated versus non-treated. The treated animals were exposed to DHP for 4 months continuously. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the 4-month period. At the end of the 4 months, we studied the animals. So the lung tissue and the lymphatic system of the animals treated were much healthier, and there was no presence of MRSA in the snout of the animals. In the non-treated animals, there was the normal health lungs and lymphatic system, but there was presence of MRSA in the snout. So what this showed over a continuous exposure for 4 months, that there was no danger of any health dangers, and actually made them in better health. So this is the overview of basically how our technology works. So on your left-hand side, you have your traditional cleaning methods. You have your terminal cleans, you have a clean environment. Somebody comes in with a viral shed or a bioburden, any kind of pathogen or microbe comes in, you're contaminated in that space. And it's not clean again until you do a terminal clean. This is a continuous cycle, peaks and valleys over time. So when you introduce dry hydrogen peroxide into that space with the same cleaning protocol, what you do is you mute those big peaks and you make your dirtiest events a much more manageable experience in that space. So you're reducing the baseline over time, basically chasing zero. So you're going to bring that to a much more manageable level to make your normal cleaning protocol better, but also give you a level of protection in the space because you're going to have ambient hydrogen peroxide in the space. Something's introduced into that space, somebody comes in with viral shed, something's introduced in the space, you're going to attack that before you ever realize that it's present in the space. So laboratory data, so what happened on the insects is we were working actually in the poultry industry early on, and they called us one day and said, hey, all these flies are gone. And they had historically had a fly problem because they're bringing in these eggs in these hatcheries in the poultry space. So what we did is we went to Eurofins, which is one of the largest insect testing laboratories in the U.S. It's in North Carolina. We did a myriad of tests with flies, house flies, fruit flies, spider mites, aphids, cockroaches, bed bugs, etc. Highly, highly effective on all the insects that we treated against. And one thing I wanted to point out about our data, so there's a lot of data that comes in this space, and some is good data, some is bad data. What we didn't want to create was data that was done in a 2x2 or a 3x3 box. We wanted to do our data in real world environments. So our data is done that way, in the fact that it's the pathogen coupon is 10 to 15 feet away from the actual device itself and not in a little small box right in front of the machine. None of us live in a small box and none of us work in a small box, so we wanted to have realistic data sets. So we have these Salmonella and Listeria on the food safety side. Then we have influenza type A. We showed a 90% kill within 30 minutes and a 99.8% kill within an hour. Influenza A is a non-envelope virus. It's just similar type of virus as the COVID-19. It's not as quite as contagious as COVID-19, but they're very similar. And all you have to do is basically penetrate that envelope of that virus to be able to kill that. C. diff is one of the hardest pathogens that we deal with. It's an intestinal pathogen that basically goes between nursing homes and hospitals. As you can see here, it takes a matter of days to get that under control. But what you'll see in the back end of this presentation is we had a hospital where we were established in the space. C. diff was introduced into that space, and we did not allow it to colonize in that space. So that's the difference. Is once you get it under control, you keep it under control and you keep it from colonizing. MRSA, Enterococcus, mold, both airborne and surface. And so this is some of the sectors that we were working with. Most of these were prior to COVID. Some of them have expanded with COVID. So we have bottling food companies like Keurig Dr. Pepper and Pepsi, the Dodgers, the Padres. We're in about 7 baseball teams. We recently got into the Pittsburgh Penguins, Chick-fil-A hospital. This Landmark Hospital is an orthopedic hospital in Naples, Florida. The CEO just called last week and he said, we've been partnered with you guys for 3 years. We've done over 3,500 joint replacements, and we have not had a surface infection or a side infection in over 3,500 cases. So that's very significant for the fact that they're reporting us data that shows that they've been significantly impacted by our technology. The typical rate for that is about 1.5%. So that's a significant number and a significant expense and risk that they mitigated. This is so I'm not going to give you guys a dissertation on egg processing, but I can tell you, in all the areas that we've installed in, this is probably the most dynamic and the most challenging. So a little background, Cal-Maine is the largest egg producer in the world. One of their competitors had a significant salmonella recall almost 3 years ago, to the tune that it cost them about $60 million. So what happened with that recall was they're normally regulated by the USDA. All of a sudden the FDA comes in and they're swabbing everything from forklifts to walls, very invasive. So Cal-Maine's president, Sherman Miller, called me and said, I would like to go forward with your technology to be more of a hurdle technology and preventive, and basically shine a good light on the egg space with the new presence of the FDA. And that's what we did. So this particular place has over 3 million eggs per day that come into the space. So they're coming directly from the barn, full of gross contaminants into the space. They're processed, graded, weighed, packaged, and off to the consumer. So you have a lot of people working in the space. You have a lot of just dynamics with the eggs in the space. So what we did is we deployed in the space, took baselines. Within 7 days, we showed a 95% reduction in surface contaminants. When we went back at a year, it's 99.8% reduction in surface contaminants. Year and a half, it maintained 99, and we just got the 2-year data, and it's 98.8. So what that shows is it took us 7 days to get the environment under control, but we've been able to keep that under control for a period of 2 years. The beautiful part about this was in Kentucky. They've got 45 other sites that we've treated, and they range from West Coast to East Coast, up and down the Midwest. You can take those data points and you can lay them on top of one another, no matter the environment, no matter the layout, and the data is very, very similar. And just to let you know, all their spaces are all 45 are completely different. Their method of growth has been acquisition. So they're all doing the same process, but it's all in completely different layouts. So very, very consistent data came out of this. Hold on. So, and then we go to OU. So University of Oklahoma, we were working with prior to COVID. So they had a significant mold issue in 2 of their towers where the actual students were getting sick. So we've been highly successful against mold. So what we wanted to go in and do a pilot. So we did a pilot. If you look down here, the blue is the treated, the red is the non-treated. We did adjoining dorm rooms, which what happened was we took the baseline, and at 7 days, we showed a reduction in both dorm rooms. Well, there was a vent that communicated air that we weren't aware of. So we sealed that at 7 days. You'll see the treated room bottomed out and zeroed out on the mold, and the actual mold came back because it wasn't a complete kill in the non-treated. That's air test for mold. And when you look at the surface swabs, we showed a significant impact reduction in surface contaminants within 30 days, and you actually had a rise in the non-treated group. Since this, OU has taken this, and this is part of their COVID-19 plan, they ordered 2,500 units that are installed in one per dorm room with our Sphere devices. Been very, very happy with that. Pilgrim's Pride, this is a large study we did in hatcheries. So this is 26 weeks of data with over 31.2 million birds. So we divided these two birds, same flock, same genetics, into two groups, treated versus non-treated. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to take out formaldehyde, which they clean with, which is very, very toxic, obviously. And they wanted to get rid of antibiotics, which obviously there's a lot of awareness on antibiotics in our food. So what they did is they did that. They inserted our technology and removed formaldehyde and antibiotics. And at the end of 26 weeks, they looked at the data. And what they saw in the treated group, taking out the formaldehyde and the antibiotics, they had to increase their hatchability and their hatch to fertile, which is their metrics they look at. But it also, it accounted for healthier birds, so the chick weights actually went up. The other piece of knowledge that they got out of this, they looked and examined the birds, and the treated birds had actually no fungus or aspergillus in their lungs, but the non-treated birds did. And while we're not all hypersensitive to mold, it is a tax on our immune system, no matter whether you have a sensitivity or not. So this is very, very significant in that. PepsiCo was probably our first commercial partner, large commercial partner. They did this was back when we came in. They had already started the process when we came in to commercialize Synexis. So this was over four years of testing with their R&D department as far as the vetting process. So very, very extensive. Think about like a quarterly root canal. So it was very, very extensive. They dove into 3 specific areas. Obviously, they had their metrics that they wanted to hit for production, which was a 93%. We hit a 93% reduction in spoilage contaminants, which is airborne mold and yeast through an 18-month period. But they also wanted to vet our technology as far as efficacy. They wanted to look at safety, and they wanted to look at our IP. So our IP, they got their IP team. They dug into our patents. We have over 150 patents in international and obviously domestic. We're the sole provider of dry hydrogen peroxide, or the gas phase hydrogen peroxide. They brought in their own lab teams in their own real world environments to validate our data, specifically the ones they were involved with. So they wanted to look at salmonella, listeria, E. coli, mold, and yeast. And so they did that in their own labs, in their own real world settings, and basically validated our testing results. And on the safety side, they brought in Bureau Veritas, which is a large industrial hygienist. They wanted to validate the concentration of dry hydrogen peroxide in the space and employee safety. So the dry hydrogen peroxide, they used wet chemistry to determine that we were at 15 parts per billion. And then they put monitors on their employees that they wore for the week to make sure that we didn't broach the 1 part per million in a 40-hour weighted work week. We did not. We were non-detectable in those devices because they only read part per million. So we were safe there. And then in November of last year, we were published in their SOP, or their sanitation manual playbook for all of their facilities. And we're in the process of installing in all 34 bottling facilities globally, and also working on the food production side as well. They also noted that the insects, basically flies, in their syrup rooms, which were problematic, were gone as well. So very, very extensive project, but very, very successful. This is just the data that they validated in their own studies. We showed, this is all pre-COVID, obviously, but we were working with some of these produce companies, and they wanted to evaluate our effectiveness on reduction of ethylene gas in some of their trucks or their containers. So we showed a 6x reduction in ethylene buildup over time. Significant to these, and also Chick-fil-A's looked at this, but significant if they can add a day or 2 of shelf life onto their products, very, very significant to their bottom line. This is a mold study. Basically what we did is we have one treated, one non-treated. At the end of 5 days, you'll see the mold growth in the non-treated, and you'll see no mold formation on the treated. You do see some dehydration, obviously, because it was not refrigerated, but no mold formation. So Chick-fil-A is a big partner of ours as well. So we went through what they call their innovations laboratory. So innovations, they get between 800 and 1,000 applications every year. And it's everything from food safety to efficiencies to any kind of issues that they deal with within their space. And we were the fastest company adopted for full deployment in their history. So this particular, and we're in the front and the back of the house, so we're in all areas of the Chick-fil-A. This particular Chick-fil-A had a mold issue. So the mold was so bad that the employees were actually getting sick and having to be hospitalized. What they did is they took they took their baselines and used a traditional mold mitigation company or mediation company, and what they did is clean the ducts, they cleaned the air handler, came back within 7 days. They still had a significant issue, so they brought in Synexis. We were scheduled to install in there anyway. We came in, did a baseline, actually grew worse than it was because they did not get all of the mold. And within 7 days, we showed a 98% reduction in airborne mold within that space. And it's been sustained it's zeroed out at 30 days. Chick-fil-A also wanted to look at ROI. So this was an operator that had 2 stores, one treated, one non-treated, in Florida in the middle of summer. So it's not in the peak of cold and flu season. He wanted to see how having a treated store would impact his employee call-out data. So how many sick days. So what he saw was an average of about $1,700 savings per month with a treated store with less sick days than the non-treated store. The LA Dodgers. So we're in, like I said, we're in several Major League Baseball teams, just got into NHL, working in some other areas with some colleges now. Dodgers was one of my first baseball projects. So we installed basically from home plate to the left field foul pole, everything underneath the stadium. That's where the players and coaches areas are. So one thing about baseball is they have a significant amount of data. So they just wanted to track their own data. So we had nothing to do with the grabbing this data. This was all internal that they mined themselves. So what we did is we looked at 2018 and 2019 versus a 3-year average prior to deploying our technology. So what they saw was a 40% reduction in all illnesses through 2019, a 95% reduction in days missed, a 75% reduction in prescriptions written, and a 9% reduction in upper respiratory. So the 9% doesn't seem significant, but considering there was massive wildfires in 18 and 19 all around Dodger Stadium, they were very, very happy with that. So they take 4 of our Century standalone units on the road for every road game for the visiting locker room, get it set up about 6 hours before they comes in. They've shown significant reduction in, like I said, their illnesses and their events. To the point that they've got to the World Series 2 years in a row. They didn't win because we can't pitch for them, but they did actually have very, very good success. Take note. So that's on the West Coast. On the East Coast in Florida, completely different environment. We also have some significant data. So this was installed in their spring training first in the race. And what they saw is they looked at a 10-year historical data piece where they had 2 to 5 players get sick per week. The entire spring training after we were deployed, they had 1 illness the entire year. So we showed a 95% reduction in bacteria and environmental mold throughout the facility. In the hospitality sector, Hard Rock Casino in Florida, they wanted to just mitigate smoke odor. So what we did is we went in and mitigated the smoke odor. So somebody basically could have an active smoker within 5 feet, and you weren't able to detect or smell the smoke. Last mold slide. So Puerto Rico, this was a challenging in the fact that it was Puerto Rico post-hurricane, Abercrombie and Fitch. It was in a mall situation. So the mall, obviously open air. There's no front door to these stores in the mall. The only the way that they close it at night was at the chain system that comes down. So continuous communication between outside and inside air. So I wasn't quite sure what our results were going to be. I knew we would have an impact. I just didn't know how dramatic it would be. So we took a baseline. Within 30 days, we had a 96% reduction in the airborne mold. At 90 days, we completely wiped it out. What you'll see on the right-hand side is this more significant mold issue was in the back of the house where they had less air circulation. Dramatic impact on that front, but we also made an impact on the areas closest to the front of the store. So that's more of a deployment strategy where you're basically trying to create a buffer or like an air curtain where you're not losing continuously out the front door. And then we get into healthcare. So as I said, we're all from the healthcare space. We're working closely in this space as far as managing expectations, managing claims, gathering data for the FDA. We're doing a lot of studies, both domestically and internationally. We're doing some work with St. Jude and their cancer wards. We're working in some hospitals that have now been COVID wards internationally. We're about to do a big project here in Dallas, Texas at Baylor Scott and White. We're going to be deploying in their transplant recovery unit and their COVID unit. So they're all contiguous together on the same floor. This one particularly was done in Las Vegas at Sunrise Medical Center. So it's a 690-bed acute care hospital. We looked at 3 high-risk areas. So it's pediatric ICU, pediatric ER, adult oncology, and cardiovascular. We took 3 sets of baselines, and then we did a day 1, basically 28, 60, and 90-day air and surface samples. We did handrails / bed rails, did bed curtains, which are the privacy curtains between patients, probably never cleaned. At least I've never seen them cleaned when I was in the hospital environment, and then cabinets and nurses' counters. So what you're going to see, these charts are going to look very similar to what you saw in the egg space. So you'll see this is an aggregate of all these swabs, but you see an immediate reduction within a day, and it's maintained over 60 days. There's a little pop up at day 28, but that's an active environment. So that's different patients, different staff, different visitors. There's different things going on in that space. So it's a real world environment. If you'll look over here, we talked about C. diff being one of the hardest things for us to control. That was introduced into this environment at 3 different spaces, and it was not established, did not colonize. Then you look at pediatric emergency department, very, very similar. Different environment, different section of the hospital, different patient population, but the data looks very, very similar. Get it under control within a day. Active environment, you're going to have little peaks and valleys, but it maintains control throughout the space. Pediatric ICUs, very similar. Trauma surgical. So the key is, I mean, you've seen data from athletics, fast food, egg processing or food processing, and medical, and it's highly, highly consistent. It's consistent data across different verticals, different environments, different locations within the country. Very, very consistent. These are our 3 devices that we have today. So the blade unit is installed into the HVAC system itself. So let me, I said earlier that we don't rely on air exchanges for our efficacy. So let me explain that. So we're not installed in the main air handler. We're not installed in the main trunk. We're more in the branch location. So these are usually installed between 3 to 5 feet from the diffuser. If there's a series of offices that are very, very small, we can go back in the line a little bit and capture all 3. But for a major room, we can't put it in a major air handler. There's a lot of line loss with this because we're actually creating active dry hydrogen peroxide for the space, as opposed to having our efficacy by something going through a plasma field or a UV light within the duct. So closer to the ductwork, each unit can cover approximately 1,000 square feet. Then we have the sphere unit and the Sentry unit. So same technology with the sail and the UVA light. The difference is these both have onboard fans, so we're not relying on the HVAC for circulation. So Sentry was more of an industrial unit. We'll use it in like gyms. It can get up to about 1,500 square feet, depending on conditions and airflow. A lot of work with the Pepsi and some of the food production, the egg facilities. We use the Sentry. It's a little more durable. It's a steel box, weighs about 40 pounds. The Sphere is our most recent addition. This is what has been deployed in hospital rooms, dorm rooms, and office space where they didn't want to access the ductwork or did not have access to the ductwork. So with these, we change the catalyst once per quarter, and we change the bulb once every 2 years. On these devices will change. They have an air intake filter, which will change on a quarterly basis as well. What we did, basically, from going from Sentry to Sphere, the things we had to mitigate, this has some light emissions because the black light's on top, so it was more of an industrial setting, so not ideal to put in somebody's office or in somebody's like a room. So we wanted to mitigate or get rid of the light emission, and we also wanted to bring down the fan noise, which we've done that. I've actually got this in my office now. The Sphere, about 2 feet away, does not interfere at all with my day-to-day operation. It's got a 3-speed fan system. Like I said, there's 2,500 in the dorms at OU. Kansas State also is putting in about 2,000 as well. We have numerous orders that we had for university housing. It's been a very, very popular device. These weigh about 12 pounds. They're injected molding, easy for us to ramp up production. There's a model that has a stand, so you can just have a stand that you make it a tabletop, or we can mount it on the wall as shown in this picture. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions.